So what is freedom of speech, and does it even matter anymore?
The fact that I'm hesitating right now in my response to that question shows that we may not be in this quote unquote free country and have this freedom of speech that people talk about so much.
I don't even think I remember what it is. I mean, I know what freedom of speech is supposed to be, but it seems like it's come under attack a lot lately. And not just in the ways people know, everyone knows Jimmy Kimmel, but it's coming down to how individuals use social media. It's what people can say, what journalists can write. It's coming into play just literally anywhere.
Right. Protest rights and what you have the right to object to or be anti against.
Right. So let's take it back. What is a freedom of speech and where does it come from? Right. So it comes from the First Amendment. The First Amendment, these come from the Bill of Rights. And I think we need to remember that the Bill of Rights came after the Revolutionary War. And the whole idea behind the Bill of Rights was that we were so wary of a government that was so controlling, that was somewhat fascist, that we... Am I allowed to say fascist? The fact that I had to ask that.
Yeah.
The fact that I had to take a moment and ask, can I say that?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so the Bill of Rights was written because after the Revolutionary War, we were so afraid of a government that was controlling that the new U.S. government created this Bill of Rights to say these are rights that cannot be taken away from citizens by the government. So when we say you have the freedom of speech, it's not just this like hoity-toity idea of like, say whatever you want. It's this idea of that you're allowed to say what you need to say, even if it's against the government, and the government shouldn't have been able to do anything about it. That was the whole idea behind freedom of speech.
Right. It's supposed to be one of the most important rights in a democracy and actually helps create a healthy democracy.
Yeah.
I'm wearing my Fight the Power Public Enemy shirt.
Nice.
And in that song, they have a quote. Chuck D says, "Our freedom of speech is freedom or death. We have to fight the powers that be." So he's saying this right that we have is what protects us from our demise, you know, because we have the right to speak up and criticize things that are detrimental to us. When corporations are taking over our government, when fascism is taking over our government, the people have the right to stand up or should have the right to stand up. And that's what's going to save us.
Yeah. But what we're seeing right now is that we're seeing it, that it's being stunted. Free speech is being stunted in so many different ways. You named a few of them. I guess we can get into it. Some of it, whether it be the president himself, can't even really say his name. He's he who shall not be named because we might get censored ourselves. There are the entities that the government is sort of the private entities that the government has allowed to take over. But where do you want to start?
Right. I think we can step back before Jimmy Kimmel and look at the Stephen Colbert situation, another late night TV host who was attacked and filtered and fired actually because of what he said, late exercising his right to free speech. Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because they didn't necessarily say anything over the top.
Right.
You know, there are a lot of things that have been being said in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder, which was sort of the impetus for all of this. That have been more extreme. Jimmy Kimmel said something that if you were to sort of debate it was just a truth.
Right.
Just because the truth now feels very anti-government, anti-establishment, it was considered out of pocket and wrong, quote unquote wrong, by the powers that be. And so he was pulled off the air. And the response was interesting because I wasn't sure how people were going to respond.
Right.
I thought, you know, maybe I'm a little pessimistic, but I thought the response was going to be, well, he should not talk about politics.
Well, some people actually did
respond. And some people did respond
that.
like that. But it seems like by and large, the greater response we saw was, why are you not letting him talk about politics?
Right.
He's a late night host. That's what they do notoriously. So were you surprised by the reaction by the media companies controlling the Jimmy Kimmel show?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's existed for 20 years in the show. hundreds of episodes. And as you mentioned, it wasn't really anything too controversial.
Yeah.
But our country is in a moment right now with the murder of Charlie Kirk being used to take advantage of opportunities like this. So I was surprised to see ABC and Disney respond in their letter explicitly saying that they were indefinitely suspending him. But then I was more surprised and actually revitalized by the public outcry and the organizers responding, celebrities and others that forced ABC and Disney to reconsider their firing of him.
Yeah, I think, there's this idea that when it's something mainstream like the Jimmy Kimmel show, you're going to get more of a greater take of the U.S. Like, the fans of the show range from, folks who live in cities, folks who live in rural areas, folks who are of one demographic, folks who are of another demographic. So you kind of get more of a understanding of like a better idea of the pulse of the people to see how people react, right? It's easy for us to say how we would react because, well, we come from a certain background. We do this sort of work all the time, but we got more good pulse of America because we saw folks react to the fact that he was censored and saying it out loud. They weren't just saying like, oh, I like Jimmy Kimmel, bring him back, that sucks. It was very much like he shouldn't be censored. He should be allowed to say what he said. And it was nice to see. And I think traditionally we've not seen Hollywood per se be out loud in any of these sort of things going on right now. And it was nice to see that as well. Just because they're the influence, right? Say what you will about mainstream, about Hollywood, about who knows best for this country, but seeing that people could very easily say, hey, he was censored, and being able to identify it and say out loud that they didn't agree with the way he was mistreated was refreshing.
Yeah. And it was great to see that letter with over 400 signatories, people from Robert De Niro to Selena Gomez and others. The ACLU helped to organize, and he actually read part of the letter when he was reinstated on air.
Yeah.
But he also shared something really important in his first return. He talked about how his colleagues in other countries, whether they're in Russia or other countries that are viewed as more oppressive in terms of free speech, he said that his colleagues were saying, well, this is what we look up to the U.S. because your ability to actually say these things and have these conversations. And that's important because it's really just a conversation. That's what free speech allows for us to engage, whether we agree or disagree. We can at least have a conversation. But when you see the government stepping in and trying to filter that, trying to limit it, and actually removing people because of these conversations, that's when it gets really dangerous.
But what we're seeing is social media platforms. You see people with certain buzzwords are used, particularly referring to the current administration. You see that their platform is being stunted. You see that their reach is being narrowed. We've even seen folks who are trying to get back into the U.S., but based on their social media profiles, aren't allowed in. Right? And so we're seeing that, and it could be something as simple as they reposted a story or they posted something that was anti-establishment, and, they got labeled as anti-American or the dreaded word Antifa, so which has become a buzzword lately because there are a lot of buzzwords now. And these buzzwords are not just words that are like, haha, we have different stances on them. These buzzwords are words now that, in terms of censorship, in terms of limiting the reach of people's voices, are how people are being identified as, not supportive of the current regime.
Public enemies, so to speak,
exactly.
right?
But it's interesting because there's so many words that are buzzwords that throughout the years, throughout American history, that if you actually looked at the actual word, they're not bad words.
Yeah, so let's talk about that before we dig deeper.
Yeah.
So Antifa is now this, according to the executive order signed by the president,
right.
It is a terrorist organization,
right.
And anyone affiliated with it will actually be scrutinized. And I've actually already seen some people I follow on Instagram, their profiles have a disclaimer, like this person is associated with Antifa. Like these are comedians and others who I've never actually heard say anything.
What in the world, yeah. And it's interesting because organizations file taxes. Organizations have charters. There is no Antifa organization.
No such
or
thing.
organization.
I've never heard of an organization called Antifa.
Also, Antifa stands for anti-fascist. It's a worldwide word, phrase, idea, movement that people associate with when they fear that their governments all throughout the world are becoming a little too controlling, a little bit too authoritarian, a little bit too fascist.
Mm-hmm.
And so Antifa, anti-fascist, is not the worst phrase.
No. I mean, you would think by reading this executive order from the president that it's a bad thing to be anti-fascist. And we need to remind people that there's been over a century of movements globally, like you said, whether it's in Italy and Spain, here in the U.S., right? And other places resisting when the government attempts to become fascist. And it's not a bad thing to resist, but it's now becoming a dangerous thing that gets you targeted here in this quote unquote free country.
Yeah, and the gist of it is there are so many people now that are rising up and speaking out loud against the U.S. government, against things that he who shall not be named is doing, that is happening right now. But instead of saying that each of these people must be crazy or wrong, it's much easier to criminalize someone or groups of people, or to sort of just make it out to seem like their thoughts are almost anti-American,
Right.
by labeling them as this scary, ubiquitous Antifa.
Right.
But we've done this before. There was the big thing was McCarthyism, right? The idea that if you were some sort of socialist or communist, that you're automatically bad,
Right.
that you're automatically anti-American. But communism, socialism, these ideas, they're not actually the worst. In fact, they're pretty darn good if you actually delve into them.
I mean, they literally have the words community and society or social in them. And itself, they stand for political frameworks that are more inclusive and for things to be owned and directed and benefit the people versus other...
versus capitalist.
Essentially, right? So that's the danger I've noticed with free speech. When you're saying something that's a threat to capitalism, that's when you're really cracked down on. Like if we think of what happened with the Washington Post recently, and we know the Washington Post is now owned by one of the world's richest people, Jeff Bezos. And there was a journalist at the Washington Post who shared a social media post about the Charlie Kirk incident, not condoning political violence, not saying, burn in hell Charlie Kirk or anything like that, but just sharing the impact of his words and actions on black women as she was a black woman. And what happened because of this post?
She's fired,
She
right?
was fired. Now, she's criticizing a sister, and this wasn't even related to her job. She just did a social media post where she expressed herself.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening now in this quote unquote free country, where when you express yourself, if it doesn't align with a certain political or social framework, then you can be filtered. And it's dangerous to see the president himself actually enter threats to media companies, to journalists and others to say, when we see messages that are not consistent with our values and our interpretations of situations, we will filter you. That is the complete opposite of free speech.
Yeah. And it's just, it feels so almost silly. And the reason I say silly is that for all intents and purposes, the president of the United States is one of the most powerful people in the world.
Right.
Not just in this country, but in the world. And is already operating like they can do what they want. But to be so concerned with people going against them when we don't actually have as much of the power to, immediately stop him, tells you a lot. It tells you that it must be so that the voices of dissent are getting louder and bigger, that it suddenly becomes necessary or becomes a priority for him to put a stop to it.
Right.
And that's something that I sort of keep thinking about, is that what is it that all of a sudden he's turning his attentions to the quote unquote little people that he's not really been paying attention to before?
Right.
You know?
And that could mean that the resistance is actually doing a good job of resisting when the federal government has to threaten broadcast license of, companies that have been doing this for years. It shows that something new is happening right now in this moment in time.
Or having to harness, federal powers, the FCC, to do that. It also says a lot too. But as much as I take away from it, like, I'm so glad that the voices are getting louder, it's scary. It's scary because as much damage has been done already, there's so much more to come, it feels like. Because it feels like, if something worse were to happen or some big catastrophe were to happen, that we won't be able to say much.
Right.
And also it spreads misinformation. It spreads this misunderstanding of where people stand. So that is sort of things that people should be wary about.
Yeah. You mentioned a lot of damage has been done and who knows what's to happen in the future. But I'm going to read some of the recent things that have happened related to free speech in this country. So we mentioned the Jimmy Kimmel situation. We mentioned that Trump publicly threatened broadcasters' license if they give them quote unquote bad publicity. The White House also proposed the Media Integrity Directorate and to rate and condition regulatory approval for quote unquote accuracy. So the White House wants to do their own quote unquote fact check when sources like Politico and others have done fact checks of this current president to show that actually most of what he's saying is not actually accurate or rooted in reality. CBS canceled the Stephen Colbert show because of their criticism of the Trump Paramount settlement. The Washington Post dismissing the journalists. The White House now has very narrow press access, favoring friendly outlets that give limited protest coverage. And it's important to mention that CNN and other news outlets have actually sued the administration because of access to the White House press room. And again, if it was a free country, you wouldn't have to sue to gain access to the president. The government has pushed for TikTok ownership to change the bans and raise censorship concerns. And we're seeing states like Texas actually create their own laws to regulate social media. They're using the guise of
protecting the youth,
right? But they're applying these broadly sweeping categories of information that they're trying to filter and actually limit.
Yeah, it's interesting because, sometimes you hear these sort of, well, we don't want to be like those other communist countries, or we don't want to be like China, where, there's a history of like deep regulation and censorship. But that's what we're kind of seeing happening. And so as much as we want to say land of the free, we're kind of going in the other direction right now. And I think there's a part of freedom of speech that people don't realize comes with it is freedom of the press is right there next to it, And so the ability of like the press to get close to the news, the access to the newsroom, or in other cases, what we're seeing in, all of the different cities in the country is that as protests grow for whatever reason, we're seeing journalists be limited. Right? Not able to cover what's going on out there. And so we're not able to get an understanding of what's happening out there too. So, that's another version of, we're not able to get information or even speak to it.
I mean, we've seen journalists being attacked by police. We've seen people trying to exercise their right to free speech on the streets, which is another really important part of free speech. It's not just, the Jimmy Kimmels and what they can say on TV, but it's we the people and what we can say in these streets. And you see protest suppression happening in many forms and evolving with technology as Google collects where we're going and sharing that data.
Yeah. And, it's sort of all related. We've talked about it in other podcasts. There's the whole Big Brother aspect, freedom of speech. It's all related. Even, people's social media algorithms.
I mean, that's been going on. People
it's been going on, but
and
it's true. I noticed if I repost something or I post something personally that takes a stance on whatever issue, my views and likes go down, but I post a darn selfie and then all of a sudden, so But I mean, it's that simple, right? And that's just the average person on social media, which for all intents and purposes is a pretty innocuous way of speaking out.
Yeah. And it's interesting what's happening with social media, because you have these companies like Meta that are suspending their fact checking that requires, larger filters to be applied to when people put hateful things out there,
Right.
or it's been proved that governments, Russia and others, have actually been using Meta to spread disinformation and different things. So they're pulling back on that fact checking. However, they're shadow banning people who put up a watermelon or say Free Palestine.
Sure, yeah, the littlest things get you, shadow banned now, and I think for people to navigate this, it's sort of interesting, right? People are finding new and creative ways to speak out. People are figuring out how to organize offline. People are figuring out how to gather otherwise. But it could really stunt people's abilities to organize,
Right.
Because social media is sort of how people have been doing this. Understanding what's happening in the news, seeing what's happening is how people get galvanized. And so, again, there's a cooling effect when the freedom of speech is no longer what it used to be.
Mm-hmm. And it's a dangerous way it's creeping into our schools, too. I mean, two examples of very concerning trends with freedom of speech in schools. One relates to the book bans that's happening in libraries and all over the country. Some states are actually passing really restrictive curriculum laws and different things. And that's impacting free speech, because we have the right to access that information. People have the right to express it. And the government is getting in the way and determining that. And then another way in education free speech is being impacted is what's happening on college campuses,
Right.
where protests and people exercising their First Amendment right is being suppressed in ways that we haven't seen really since the Vietnam War anti-war protests.
We're just down the street from UCLA, and while their big, encampment was over a year ago, we're still seeing that in the aftermath, there's so much litigation going on. The president actually tried to sue UCLA for damages, essentially. To sanction them, essentially. So we're seeing that in the aftermath, there's still, the cooling effect.
Right. College students are still being deported for exercising their free speech on campuses.
And college students are still finding that they have to fulfill certain requirements to graduate because they participated in some sort of, free speech action.
Right. None of these things sound like a quote-unquote free country.
Not at all. They don't. And, going back to it, First Amendment rights, it's not that we said that these are random rights that we just decided for ourselves we deserve. These were rights against the government. The whole idea about the freedom of speech, I just want to reiterate this, is that it couldn't be taken away by the government. And right now we're seeing an onslaught from the government of ways to take that freedom of speech away.
Yeah. In this current era of free speech, we're seeing a shift of the role of the FCC, which is supposed to be something that provides oversight and protections for the people in the many areas they do, right? Not just bleeping out, a curse word or something
which
like
people
that.
mostly know them for bleeping out curse words.
No, but I mean, we have to think of the airwaves as something that actually belongs to the people, that's owned by the people, and it's in the people's interest to keep those free and information flowing across it. But now, literally, the Jimmy Kimmel firing came from the FCC also trying to pressure Disney. And, that's I think we should probably read the quote from the FCC chair specifically about this. But they're shifting although government departments and entities have often been problematic, so we're never saying that the FCC was, an angel or anything. But it's shifting to be a censorship thing on part of the state and government.
Right. The FCC was never perfect, but for all intents and purposes, the FCC was more so, again, as much as we say like, oh, they're just regulating cuss words or making sure there's nothing to lewd on TV. Those are things that arguably you could say like, oh, it's for the protection of, for folks, people's children might just turn on the TV, et cetera, et cetera. So they had rules and regulations that they were abiding by. But now, like you said, their focus has shifted it's now looking specifically at what is the content and do we allow it? You know, and it's not fitting into those rules and regulations before that were just basically protecting the airwaves from, you know, from making sure children don't see or hear anything they're not supposed to. Now it's about making sure that information isn't getting out there. Now it's making sure that essentially the FCC is acting like a federal entity that is towing the company line. In this case, the president can do no wrong company line. And it just seems to be that's now their function. And that's a shame.
Yeah, it's supposed to stand for the Federal Communications Commission, but it's the Federal Censorship Commission. It
Now
seems like
it's still FCC.
So the FCC chair, Brendan Carr himself, had a huge role in the Kimmel situation when he came out publicly and said to ABC, quote, "We can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way."
Jeez.
Yeah, it's mafioso gangster shit
That's
right
such
there, right?
posturing. Yeah.
Yeah. But check out some quotes from FCC Chair Brendan Carr earlier where he said, quote, "Should the government censor speech it doesn't like? Of course not. The FCC does not have a role in roving the mandate to police free speech in the name of, quote, public interest." And he had many quotes like this. Another one, he said, quote, "Political satire is one of the oldest and most important forms of free speech. Yet, he literally tried to filter political satire."
He flipped the script and quickly. And I mean, it just kind of goes to show you that at the end of the day, he knew where his paycheck was coming from.
Exactly.
And also, you know, or even then, it's just maybe it's just that powerful of there's that much of pressure put on him. But that's a shame.
Yeah.
To know that he once knew what they stood for and that they've completely lost that.
Yeah, it sounds like a completely different person.
Yeah. Again, the pressure must have been a lot. And again, at the end of the day, the administration has more power over him than he realizes.
Exactly.
Oof.
So I want to share a few more song quotes to wrap us up from...
I'm here for it.
Yeah. Because, I mean, music and art itself is one of the most robust expressions of freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And all artists are often the first ones getting filtered.
Oh, yeah.
So it's no surprise that one of the first guests that Kimmel brought on after all of this was Public Enemy.
That was such a good choice.
Yeah.
When I saw that, I had a moment where I just went, ha. Yeah.
No, I love Public Enemy. I mean, that song, Fight the Power, is literally part of the reason why I'm a civil rights lawyer today and why we fight the power, you know, because it told us the importance and our role and our duty. Speaking of sacred duty, rest in peace to Assata Shakur, who always talked about this sacred duty we have to fight for freedom, and Fight the Power is about that.
And to win.
And to win, yes, right. But we fight the power through our freedom of speech, through our words. So some other examples of this, of course, Public Enemy, as I mentioned, our freedom of speech is freedom or death. Freedom of speech is not a luxury. The punk rock group, The Clash, had a song called Know Your Rights that came out in the 80s where they said, quote, "You have the right to free speech." And they cite this right, but they also talk about its limits and sort of pokes fun at it, you know, as punk rock bands often do with political things. One of my favorite quotes related to free speech that people don't even realize it was Gil Scott-Heron's 1970 classic, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." Because what he's saying by that is that, you know, he's warning that real political speech happens to be with gatekeepers and others.
Right.
So you're not actually going to see it on the television. That was a warning. That was a prophecy. Other ones, you know, Bob Marley, "Get Up, Stand Up." That is an assertion of our rights. Stand up for your rights.
Stand up for your rights is
Don't
the
give
next
up
line.
the fight. Yeah. And how do you exercise that? Through the words you say, through your actions, through protests is a form of free speech. So in that vein, I mean, many Bob Marley songs were free speech songs.
Yeah.
Bringing it back to L.A., Rage Against the Machine, the 1992 classic, "Killing in the Name of."
Yeah.
Says, "Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me."
Actually, you know, it's funny. Tom Morello from Rage, he just posted something on social media that says, "Yes, I am Antifa."
Yeah.
So speak of the devil, but I just had to jump in with that one. Yeah.
Right, but think about when you say "fuck you, I won't do what you tell." Who are they talking about? They're talking about the government that's trying to force them to say something or do a certain thing, and your right to say "fuck you, I won't do what you tell me" is you exercising your right to free speech.
And the machine is the government. Sorry, I just had to
Thank you for
say
bringing
that out
that back.
loud. It's a thing that every like 2 years on social media, somebody who doesn't quite understand what Rage Against the Machine is raging against will suddenly decide they're no longer a Rage Against the Machine fan because they're anti-government. And somebody has to reply with like, "What did you think the machine was?"
Yeah, and I wouldn't say the Rage Against the Machine is anti-government.
They're mostly anti-establishment.
They're anti-oppressive government.
Yeah, oppressive government. Yeah.
You know, because they're exercising their rights to free speech and different things.
I just had to throw that in there because it amuses me that every 2 years somebody has a come to Jesus moment about the fact that the machine is just the oppressive government. But
yeah,
go on. Sorry.
Right. And there's even more. So I think one of the most controversial bands or groups in history of free speech is also LA related, NWA.
I was going to say NWA.
Right. I mean, that song "Fuck the Police" caused so much controversy. I remember the FCC having a hissy fit over that too. But NWA also released a song called "Express Yourself." And in that song, they were talking about the importance of using art in different ways to express yourself, to criticize systems, and not being afraid.
Right. And that's the whole thing, right? You have to not be afraid. It's interesting. There's this sort of, I'm Filipino, there's this quote, because there's a lot of unrest going on in the Philippines as well over the whatnot. But one of their quotes in Tagalog is "Makibaka wag matakot." In English, that stands for "Dare to struggle, do not be afraid." And so it's sort of just like a cool phrase. And I think it's a reminder to folks that with all of this going on, it's really easy to be like, oh, okay, well, I won't say these certain words because I don't want to get censored. And okay, I'm going to figure out my way around it. But at the end of the day, maybe we just have to not be afraid and say what we need to say anyway.
Right.
And I think that should be sort of like a takeaway here is that we just have to be able to, it's going to be a struggle, but you know what? We're just going to have to do it anyway. And we're just going to have to learn to not be afraid.
No, it takes bravery, but we have to do it.
Exactly.
And you mentioned Tom Morello, him saying it with his chest that he's anti-fascist. I love the fact that his guitar has this statement that actually comes from Woody Guthrie, another folk singer from the 1940s. But it says, "This machine kills fascists."
Yeah.
Woody Guthrie said that in the 1940s on his acoustic guitar. Tom Morello puts it on his electric guitar now. And I was thinking about putting something similar on my guitar
You should.
these days.
Yeah.
You know, even though I could be deemed a terrorist for talking.
I mean, I have a friend who has that sticker on their dog's like collar, and you would expect like this big dog. It's a Pomeranian, and I think it's funny. Go for it.
Right, exactly. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, so those are just some artistic expressions.
I think if we can find a way to take those phrases that have become so scary to people, like "this machine kills fascist" or Antifa or communism, socialism, whatever it is, if we can sort of almost take them back and give them the true power they have, which is to say the truth, then maybe that's one way that we can fight the whole idea that these words are scary because those in power don't like them.
Right.
They're not scary. They're just that those in power don't like them. That's really just the truth. So maybe if you put it on your guitar, just like my friend has it on her dog's collar, that, you know what, it's sort of taking away the bad energy and the bad reputation that was given to them, and we're just, putting new life into it.
Right.
Yeah.
And wrapping it up to bring it back to our rights.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, this being in the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, our right to free speech. It's one of the most critical rights that we have as American people.
Yeah.
And we can't forget that. So the people have to remember that they have to be brave in exercising these rights and understand that there will be resistance, there will be repression, there will be different things, but we have to get up, stand up for our rights.
Right. And again, just because the rights were given to us doesn't mean that we just get to say, hey, they're ours no matter what. We have gone so long without having to fight for them to this extent, in the sense of we've always seen some censorship, but not this much. And so it should be a galvanizing force that we want to maintain, keep, and expand these rights. And so knowing them, know what it really means, which is against the government, and then just really not being afraid to exercise them is how we'll keep them.
And I think that's what the Jimmy Kimmel situation brought to surface, too.
Sure.
It forced the conversation of, wait, how free are we? Because you see so many people proudly waving that American flag because it, quote unquote, stands for freedom. But the way we suppress speech here.
Yeah.
really should force us to
And
consider.
for some, I think, who have not had to deal with not feeling free in this country for many different reasons, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, for some people, this might be some of the first times that they feel some sort of oppression. And, it's not a knock to them. It's just saying that, like, hey, now you kind of get a baby sense of what it's like to live in a country that may not always support you and what you have to say or be. And so keep that in mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning into the Know Your Rights Camp podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media and check out our website, knowyourrightscamp.org. And remember, fight the power.